Maria nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "It feels alive." Just then, the new manager, Mr. Lewis, recognized Ethan and approached with a bright smile. "Sir, Mrs. Carter, and welcome. It's an honor to have you both here." Maria returned the smile politely. "It's lovely, Mr. Lewis. Everything feels so peaceful now." He nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. We changed our motto, you know. It's written on the new menu cover." Curious, Maria opened the menu. On the first page, in elegant golden letters, were the words, "Respect is the finest dish we serve." She read it twice, tears slowly forming in her eyes. Ethan reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Mr. Lewis continued, "We share that story with every new employee who joins us, about what happened and how it changed everything. It reminds us why we're here." Maria smiled through her tears. "That's beautiful." A few minutes later, as they enjoyed their meal, something touching happened. A young woman walked in, wearing a faded dress and holding a small child by the hand. Her face looked anxious as she whispered something to the hostess. Maria watched quietly. The hostess smiled warmly, nodded, and led the woman to a corner table. No hesitation, no judgment, just kindness. The woman's relief was visible. Her shoulders relaxed and a tiny smile appeared on her lips. Maria couldn't take her eyes off them. She turned to Ethan. "Do you see that?" she asked softly. He nodded. "That's what I wanted you to see," Maria whispered. "That could have been me, Ethan, that day." Ethan smiled gently. "Exactly. And now, no one will ever be treated that way again." When their meal was over, Ethan asked for the bill. But before the waiter could bring it, Mr. Lewis returned with something else. A small envelope. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "It's a letter," the manager said softly. "From our old staff, the ones who worked here before the change. They wanted you to have it." Maria opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, we were wrong. We judged too fast and we forgot what respect means. Your story opened our eyes and hearts. We've learned that every person who walks through those doors carries their own story, and they all deserve to be treated with dignity. Thank you for forgiving us by giving us a second chance. With respect and gratitude." And the former staff of Carter's table, Maria couldn't hold back her tears anymore. "They learned," she whispered. "They truly learned." Ethan smiled, his voice gentle. "That's the real victory, Maria. Not the money, not the ownership, but the change." They left quietly after lunch, unnoticed by most people, but their presence lingered like a soft fragrance. The restaurant continued to grow, not because of its luxury, but because of its heart. People from all backgrounds came to eat there, and everyone left with a story about kindness. As they drove home, Maria looked out the window at the fading sunlight. She thought about how one act of cruelty had turned into a chain of kindness. She realized that sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from books or speeches. They come from real moments that touch the heart. She turned to Ethan and said softly, "Maybe the world doesn't need more rich people. Ethan, maybe it just needs more good ones." He smiled. "Then we'll keep trying to be that." And as the city lights sparkled around them, Maria knew one thing for sure: that day respect had been reborn. Time moved on, but the story of that day, the simple woman who was expelled from a restaurant and the billionaire husband who stood by her side, never faded. It spread far beyond the city. Newspapers wrote about it, bloggers shared it, and millions of people around the world watched short videos that captured fragments of that unforgettable moment. But for Maria and Ethan, it wasn't fame they cared about. It was peace, and the kind of peace that comes when pain is turned into purpose. Months later, Carter's Table became one of the most respected restaurants in the country, not because of its luxury, but because of its heart. It was now known as the place where kindness is served before food. The restaurant had started a small initiative too, the Kind Plate, where once a week they served free meals to people in need. It was Maria's idea, and Ethan made sure it happened. Every Friday afternoon, Maria would quietly visit and help in the kitchen. She wore a simple apron, just like the other workers. Most customers didn't even know who she was. To them, she was just a gentle woman who smiled at everyone and served water to tables. One day, while she was arranging plates, a familiar face walked in, the old manager who had once thrown her out. Maria froze for a second, her heart skipping a beat. He looked older now, tired, and his confident posture had faded. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. Then their eyes met. He stopped in his tracks. Guilt flooded his face instantly. He took a hesitant step forward. "Mrs. Carter," he whispered. I didn't expect to see you here." Maria smiled softly. "Hello, Mr. Blake," he swallowed hard. "I owe you an apologies again. What I did was unforgivable. I can't sleep some nights thinking about it. I was blinded by pride. I lost my job and I deserved it. But that day changed me. I started working at a small diner after that. I learned what real service means." Maria looked at him kindly. "We all make mistakes," she said gently. "What matters is that you learned from it." Tears filled his eyes. "You're still kind to me after everything I did?" She smiled. "Because anger doesn't heal, Mr. Blake, understanding does." At that moment, Ethan walked in, having just finished a meeting. He saw the two of them and understood what was happening. Without hesitation, he walked over, extended his hand, and said, "Mr. Blake, would you like to work with us again?" The man looked shocked. "Sir, after everything Ethan interrupted softly. "You've changed, and people who change deserve second chances." The man's lips trembled. He nodded quickly, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste it." That small scene became another story of grace, one that touched every person in that restaurant that day. Later that evening, after closing hours, Maria and Ethan stood together on the restaurant's terrace. The city below shimmered with thousands of lights like stars that had come down to rest on earth. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of rain and flowers. Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders. "You know," he said quietly, "this all started because someone couldn't see your worth." Maria leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe that's what it took," she said softly. "Sometimes life breaks us a little, only to build something more beautiful later." He smiled, watching the skyline. "You turned humiliation into hope, Maria. You turned my anger into compassion." She looked at him with gentle eyes. "No, Ethan. We turned pain into purpose." They stood there in silence, watching the city breathe beneath them. For the first time since that day, Maria felt completely free. Not because justice had been served, but because she had chosen forgiveness over bitterness. The next morning, a newspaper article went viral. The headline read, "From Insult to Inspiration. The Billionaire Couple Who Taught the World a Lesson in Respect." Beneath it was a photograph, Ethan and Maria standing hand in hand in front of Carter's table, both smiling humbly. The caption read, "A simple woman who taught an entire world that kindness never goes out of style." Messages of gratitude began pouring in from everywhere. Waiters, students, single mothers, elderly people, all sharing how Maria's story had given them courage to face their own struggles. One message stood out. It was from a young waitress in another city. It said, "I was once treated badly at my job because of how I looked, but your story reminded me that dignity lives in all of us. Thank you for proving that respect is not a privilege and it's a right." Maria read the message slowly, her eyes misty. She turned to Ethan and said softly, "If even one person changes because of this, it was all worth it." He smiled. "I think it's more than one, love. You've started something much bigger than either of us." As the evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ethan took Maria's hand once again. The same hands that had once trembled outside that restaurant were now steady. Strong and full of pride, not for wealth, but for grace. They drove away in the same black Porsche, the same one that had once turned heads for its luxury. But now, people recognized it for something else entirely. It wasn't just a symbol of power anymore. It had become a reminder of a story that changed hearts, a story that whispered a timeless truth. Never judge a book by its cover, and never forget. The simplest souls often carry the richest hearts. Gasps filled the air. The very same people who had judged her earlier now looked down in shame. The manager's hands began to shake. Ethan went on. "You see, my wife doesn't wear designer clothes or diamond necklaces. She doesn't need to. Because her worth isn't measured by what she wears. It's measured by her heart. And trust me, that's worth more than all the money in this room combined." Maria's eyes shimmered with tears, but she stood quietly, her head held high. He turned to the staff. "Let this be a lesson. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, whether they arrive in a Porsche or on foot, because you never know who you're turning away. More importantly, you never know whose heart you're hurting." A heavy silence filled the room. Then slowly someone started clapping. It was an older gentleman sitting at a corner table. Soon, more joined in. Soft at first, then louder until the entire restaurant was applauding. The manager stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Sir, ma'am, I'm deeply sorry. I was wrong." "We were all wrong," Ethan nodded slightly. "Apologies are good," he said. "But change is better. Remember this moment, and treat everyone who comes here with the respect they deserve." He then turned to Maria and offered his hand. She smiled faintly, slipping her fingers into his. Together they walked out of the restaurant, hand in hand like they always did. As they stepped outside, the golden sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Porsche gleamed under the fading light, almost like a symbol of quiet justice. People on the street watched as Ethan opened the door for Maria again, not as a billionaire for his wife, but as a man who deeply respected the woman beside him. Before getting in, Maria looked back at the restaurant one last time. Through the glass windows, she could still see the faces of those who had judged her earlier, now humbled, thoughtful, and perhaps changed forever. She whispered softly, "Sometimes life has a strange way of teaching people what truly matters." Ethan heard her and smiled. "Yes," he said, "and sometimes it takes just one moment to remind the world that kindness is richer than money." The car started, and as they drove away, the city lights began to flicker on. But inside that Porsche, everything felt brighter, because two hearts that valued love over luxury had just turned a moment of humiliation into a timeless lesson. The night air was calm as Ethan's Porsche glided through the glowing city streets. Streetlights reflected off the shiny black surface of the car, creating a soft rhythm of light and shadow. Inside, Maria sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap. Though she looked calm, her heart was still heavy from what had happened. Ethan broke the silence first. "You didn't deserve that, Maria," he said in a low, controlled voice. "You were treated like you were nothing, and that's something I can never accept." Maria turned her head toward him, her eyes gentle. "Ethan, you already did more than enough. Please don't be upset anymore." He looked at her briefly, then focused back on the road. "It's not about me being upset," he said softly. "It's about how people forget that kindness costs nothing." She smiled faintly. "Maybe tonight they'll remember." Ethan nodded but said nothing more. He drove in silence for a while, but Maria could see his mind working. The calmness in his voice couldn't hide the storm in his heart. After a few minutes, he suddenly turned the car around. Maria frowned, surprised. "Ethan, where are we going now?" He glanced at her, a faint smile forming on his lips. "You'll see," he said. "There's something I need to do." She didn't argue. She trusted him completely. A few minutes later, they arrived back at the same street, but this time Ethan didn't park near the restaurant. Instead, he stopped in front of a small cafe across the road. The cafe was cozy and bright, filled with laughter and music. Through the glass windows, Maria could see people from all walks of life, students, workers, families, all enjoying simple food and warm smiles. Ethan looked at the cafe, then at Maria. "This," he said, "is what real service looks like. No luxury, no diamonds, just respect." Maria smiled warmly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. But Ethan wasn't done yet. He took out his phone and made a quick call. Maria couldn't hear much, but she could tell from his tone that it was business-related. After a few minutes, he hung up and looked at her with a calm but serious expression. "Maria," he said, "you've always told me to use my success to make a difference, to do something that truly matters. I think I just figured out how." She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "That restaurant. It's about to learn a lesson they'll never forget." Maria's eyes widened. "Ethan, you're not going to punish them, are you?" He chuckled softly. "No, not in the way you think." The next day, news spread like wildfire across social media and business networks. Ethan Carter had just announced the purchase of the very restaurant where his wife was insulted. Maria found out through the morning news. She stood in their living room watching the headline scroll across the screen. "Billionaire buys luxury restaurant after wife faces discrimination." Her phone started buzzing nonstop. Calls, messages, and notifications poured in from friends and journalists. She turned to Ethan, who was calmly sipping his coffee. "Ethan," she said slowly, "you didn't actually buy it, did you?" He looked up at her with a faint smile. "I did. Why?" she asked softly. You didn't need to do that. He set down his cup and walked over to her. Because money built that place, Maria, he said gently. But it lost its soul. I want to give it back its heart. Maria blinked, speechless. He continued, I'm not going to fire anyone. I'm not going to shut it down. I'm going to rebuild it, train the staff, change the policy, and make it a place where everyone feels welcome. Whether they walk in wearing designer suits or simple dresses like yours, they'll be treated with equal respect. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. You're turning humiliation into hope, she whispered. Ethan smiled softly. No, you are. You taught me that true strength isn't in revenge. It's in compassion. That week, news reporters and bloggers flooded the story across the internet. People were touched by the humility and grace shown by the billionaire couple. Social media users shared the story, calling it the modern tale of dignity and love. When the restaurant reopened under Ethan's ownership, the change was visible from the moment people walked in. The same staff now greeted guests with genuine smiles. The same walls that once carried whispers of judgment now echoed with laughter and warmth. Maria visited quietly one afternoon, just to see. She saw a young woman in a simple outfit walk in nervously, maybe her first time there. Instead of turning her away, the waiter welcomed her with kindness. That small moment filled Maria's heart with peace. As she sat by the window sipping coffee, she thought back to that painful day, how it began with humiliation and ended with healing. She realized that life has a strange way of turning wounds into wisdom, if only we allow it. When Ethan came to pick her up later, she looked at him with pride. You know, she said softly, you didn't just buy a restaurant, Ethan, you bought back people's faith in goodness. He smiled, placing his hand over hers. No, Maria, you gave it to me first. Outside, the city lights shimmered once again, and as their car disappeared into the night, Maria felt a quiet joy inside her, the kind that only comes when love and kindness win over pride and cruelty. Weeks passed after Ethan Carter bought the restaurant, and something magical began to happen. The grand place that was once filled with pride and judgment slowly turned into a home for kindness and respect. The air inside no longer smelled only of rich food and expensive perfumes. It carried something new, something warm. It carried humanity. Maria had not visited for a while. She wanted to give the staff time to adjust, to let them grow without pressure. Ethan had hired a new manager, not someone with decades of experience, but a man named Mr. Lewis, a former waiter who had once been fired from another restaurant for standing up to a rude customer. Ethan believed people like him understood the real meaning of service, serving with heart, not ego. One afternoon, Ethan suggested to Maria, let's visit the restaurant today, quietly. No announcements, no cameras. Just us. Maria hesitated at first. The memory of that painful day still lingered somewhere in her heart. But then she smiled softly. All right, she said. Maybe it's time to see how far we've come. They arrived just before lunch hour. The restaurant looked the same from the outside, elegant glass walls and golden signs. But the feeling was different. As they stepped inside, the sound of gentle music filled the air. A waiter quickly walked up to them, smiling warmly. Good afternoon, he greeted. Welcome to Carter's table. Do you have a reservation? Ethan smiled faintly. No, we don't. The waiter's smile didn't fade. That's perfectly fine, sir. We'll find a table for you. Please come in. Maria's heart swelled. It was the same line that had once pushed her out, but now it was spoken with warmth and sincerity. The tone had changed. The respect was real. As they sat down, she looked around. The staff moved gracefully but with genuine care. They greeted every customer equally, from businessmen in suits to an elderly couple in simple clothes. There were no judgmental stares, no whispers, just kindness. Ethan leaned back in his chair and whispered, See that? Her heart was heavy, but she tried to smile. She thought about Ethan, how he always told her that no matter what the world says, she should stay true to herself. His words gave her a little strength. Just then she noticed something. People near the restaurant entrance suddenly started whispering again, but this time it wasn't about her. Heads were turning toward the street. The soft sound of an engine grew louder. Maria turned too, curious. A sleek black Porsche slowly rolled up to the front of the restaurant. Its glossy surface shone under the sunlight. The valet boys straightened their uniforms immediately, rushing to open the door. The crowd's energy shifted. Admiration replaced gossip. Maria's eyes widened. That car looked familiar, very familiar. The door opened and a tall man stepped out. Dressed in a dark gray suit, his presence commanding respect. His eyes scanned the area until they landed on her. It was Ethan. For a second, time stopped. Maria's heart skipped a beat. Ethan's expression changed from calm to concern the moment he saw her standing outside, looking lost and hurt. He began walking toward her, his pace quick, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the staff inside watching nervously. Maria whispered under her breath, her voice trembling. "Oh no, he's going to find out." She had no idea that this single moment, standing outside that restaurant, was about to become the most unforgettable turning point of her life. Maria stood frozen on the sidewalk as Ethan's Porsche came to a smooth stop right in front of her. The sound of the engine faded, but her heartbeat only grew louder. She hadn't planned for him to see her like this, standing outside the restaurant where she had just been thrown out. Her hands nervously gripped the strap of her small purse as Ethan stepped closer. "Maria?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp with worry. "What are you doing out here?" She tried to smile, though her eyes were still red. "I just came to surprise you," she said softly. "But it seems I came at the wrong time." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the restaurant manager, a tall man with slicked back hair, hurried outside. His smile looked forced. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back. We didn't know you'd be joining us today." Ethan looked at him blankly. "I'm not joining you. I came to meet my wife," he said, placing a protective arm around Maria's shoulders. "She said she was waiting for me here." The manager blinked, caught off guard. His eyes darted between Ethan and Maria, realization slowly dawning. The woman they had dismissed a few minutes ago, the one they had laughed at, was the wife of one of the most powerful men in the city. Maria looked down, embarrassed. She didn't want a scene, but Ethan could already see the tension. "What happened?" he asked quietly. His tone was calm, but Maria knew him well. That calmness meant he was holding back anger. "It's nothing, Ethan," she said quickly. "Let's just go home." But Ethan wasn't the kind of man to let injustice slide, especially when it involved his wife. He turned to the manager. "Did you or your staff say something to her?" The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, there must be some misunderstanding. We didn't realize she was with you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What difference does that make?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Does a person need to be with someone rich to deserve respect here?" The manager stuttered. "No, sir. Of course not. Ethan cut him off. "You just judged her because of how she looked, didn't you?" The people inside the restaurant were now watching the scene unfold through the glass. The same waiter who had escorted Maria out stood frozen, his face pale. The receptionist who had laughed earlier now pretended to look busy at her desk. Maria gently touched Ethan's arm. "Please, Ethan, let's not do this." But Ethan shook his head. "No, Maria, this is not about anger. It's about what's right." He turned back to the staff. "Do you know who this woman is?" he asked, his voice steady. "She's not just my wife. She's the reason I'm the man I am today. She taught me to stay humble. She taught me that people are more important than money. And today you've insulted her for being exactly that. Humble." The manager looked like he wanted to disappear. "Sir, we truly didn't mean to offend." Ethan didn't let him finish. "You didn't mean to offend. You humiliated her in front of strangers, treated her like she didn't belong. Tell me, if a poor woman walks in here alone tomorrow, will you treat her the same way?" Silence, no one spoke. The air felt heavy with guilt. Maria stood quietly beside Ethan, her eyes welling with tears again. Not of pain this time, but of emotion. She had always known her husband was kind, but seeing him stand up for her like this touched her deeply. The restaurant's customers had started whispering among themselves. Some of them looked ashamed for not speaking up earlier. A few others quietly pulled out their phones, recording the moment. Ethan sighed and looked back at Maria. "Let's go," he said softly. "You don't deserve to stand another minute in this place." He opened the Porsche's door for her, the way he always did, and she slowly got in. Before joining her, he turned to the manager one last time. "Here's a lesson you won't forget," he said. Never measure a person's worth by what they wear. Next time, treat every guest with the same respect, whether they walk in wearing diamonds or cotton. Then he got into the car and drove off, leaving behind stunned faces and an atmosphere thick with shame. Inside, the manager let out a shaky breath. That was his wife, he whispered to the waiter. The waiter nodded, looking down, guilt written all over his face. The receptionist felt tears prick her eyes as she realized how wrong she had been. As the Porsche disappeared down the street, Maria sat silently, looking out the window. Ethan glanced at her. "You shouldn't have gone through that," he said gently. Maria smiled faintly. "It's all right," she whispered. "Maybe it was meant to happen, so people can learn." Ethan looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. "You're still thinking about others after what they did to you?" Maria nodded. "Because that's what makes us different from them." Ethan reached over and held her hand. The city lights flickered on as they drove past the busy streets, but inside the car, everything felt calm again. The pain of humiliation was fading, replaced by something stronger. Dignity. Maria leaned her head against the window, feeling the cool glass on her skin. She thought about how quickly people judge others, how fast they assume without knowing the truth. But she also knew that sometimes life itself has a way of teaching lessons. And that day, the restaurant, and everyone inside it, had learned one that would echo for a long time. Never underestimate the quiet ones, for their silence often hides the strongest stories. The sky had started to change color. A soft golden glow spread across the city as the sun began to set. Maria and Ethan drove in silence for a few minutes, the sound of the car's engine filling the quiet air between them. Ethan's jaw was tight, his fingers gripping the steering wheel a little too hard. Maria could feel his anger, not because he shouted or scolded anyone, but because he cared. Deeply. "Ethan," she finally said, her voice soft and trembling. "Please don't let this ruin your evening. I'm fine now." He glanced at her, his expression a mix of sadness and pride. "You shouldn't have been treated like that, Maria. No one should." She smiled faintly, looking out the window. "You can't change the world, Ethan, but maybe today, we changed a few hearts." Ethan didn't reply, but her words settled deep in his mind. After a few moments, instead of turning toward their home, he slowed the car. Maria looked at him curiously. "Where are we going?" Ethan parked the Porsche near the same restaurant, the place that had just humiliated her. "Back," he said calmly. Maria's eyes widened. "Ethan, no, please. We've already left." "Let it go." He turned to her, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm not going back to argue. I'm going back to make things right." Before she could stop him, Ethan stepped out of the car. Maria hesitated for a second, then followed him. As they walked toward the restaurant entrance again, people outside started to whisper. Everyone recognized the famous billionaire, Ethan Carter, owner of Carter Industries, one of the largest companies in the country. Cameras from nearby pedestrians flashed. Some people even began recording videos on their phones. The restaurant staff, who had been nervously discussing the earlier incident, froze when they saw him coming back. The manager's face went pale. He rushed to the door, forcing a smile that looked more like fear. "Sir, welcome back. I hope everything is fine," he stammered. Ethan looked at him steadily. "Everything will be fine," he replied, "after I say what I need to say." He stepped inside the restaurant with Maria beside him. The once busy place suddenly fell silent. Forks stopped midair. Conversations faded and all eyes turned toward them. The grand chandeliers above seemed to shine brighter as the moment grew heavier. Ethan walked to the center of the room. "Excuse me, everyone," he said in a calm but commanding voice. "I won't take much of your time." People whispered quietly, some recognizing him immediately. "That's Ethan Carter," someone muttered. "The billionaire," Ethan continued, his voice echoing softly through the room. "A few minutes ago, this restaurant turned away a customer because she didn't look rich enough. They humiliated her in front of strangers and simply because of how she dressed." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then he looked at Maria, his eyes full of warmth and pride. "That woman," he said, pointing gently toward her, "is my wife." Maria was a simple woman with a heart full of kindness. She lived a peaceful life in a small, cozy house on the edge of the city. Even though her husband, Ethan Carter, was one of the richest businessmen in the country, she never behaved like a rich person. Maria didn't wear fancy clothes or expensive jewelry. She believed that a person's value came from their heart, not from the things they owned. Every morning, Maria would wake up early, make breakfast, and water the small plants on her balcony. She loved watching the sunrise while sipping her tea. Life was peaceful for her. Not perfect, but filled with little joys that money could never buy. While Ethan was busy running his company and attending meetings, Maria kept herself busy helping others. She often visited local shelters and schools, donating clothes and food, never revealing who she really was. Most people just saw her as a kind woman who loved helping others. Ethan adored her simplicity. When they first met years ago, she wasn't impressed by his cars, suits, or fame. Instead, she saw his heart. A man who was ambitious but lonely. That was what drew them together. Even after they got married, Maria continued to live just like before. She didn't want bodyguards following her everywhere, and she refused to have a personal driver. "I can manage," she'd always say with a smile. Ethan respected her wishes, knowing that her simple nature was what made her special. Maria didn't like fancy parties or social events where people only talked about money and brands. She often felt out of place in those gatherings. The other rich women would wear diamonds and talk about their vacations in Paris or Dubai. Maria, on the other hand, would quietly listen, wearing her plain cotton dress and small silver earrings. Sometimes she noticed the way people looked at her, like she didn't belong. But she never let that bother her. She found happiness in the simplest things. She loved visiting small bakeries, chatting with the shopkeepers, and buying bread for her neighbors. She would stop to feed stray cats on the street, or help an elderly person cross the road. People who truly knew her loved her for her warm heart. Ethan's business kept him traveling most of the time. But whenever he was home, Maria made sure they had dinner together, and no matter how busy he was. She would prepare his favorite meal, sit across from him, and listen as he told her about his work. She didn't understand all the business terms, but she always listened with genuine interest. Ethan often said that talking to her made him feel calm after a long, stressful day. One day, Ethan mentioned that he had an important meeting at a restaurant downtown, one of the most luxurious in the city. Maria had never been there before, but she knew it was the kind of place where the city's elite gathered. She thought it would be nice to surprise Ethan by visiting him there. It had been a while since they'd had lunch together outside their home, and she wanted to do something special. The next afternoon, Maria dressed up neatly but simply. She wore a clean white dress and tied her hair in a bun. She didn't think of makeup or expensive accessories. She just wanted to look presentable. She took a small purse, enough for her wallet and phone, and headed toward the restaurant by taxi. During the ride, she smiled as she thought about Ethan's reaction. She imagined his surprise and happiness when he would see her waiting for him. As the taxi stopped in front of the grand restaurant, Maria felt a bit nervous. The building was tall, with shining glass walls and valet parking full of luxury cars. She saw people stepping out of expensive vehicles, dressed in designer clothes and high heels. For a moment, she hesitated. Her dress was plain, her sandals were simple, and she didn't have any jewelry except for her wedding ring. But then she reminded herself, she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to see her husband. With a deep breath, she walked toward the entrance. The doorman gave her a quick look, his expression neutral but distant. Inside, the restaurant was stunning. Marble floors, chandeliers, and soft music playing in the background. The smell of rich food filled the air. Maria smiled softly and looked around for a waiter. She wanted to ask if her husband had arrived yet, but as she took her first steps inside, she could already feel the stares. Some customers looked up from their plates and whispered to each other. The waiters exchanged glances, wondering if she was lost. Maria didn't notice much. She was focused on finding Ethan. Her gentle smile and calm step showed her confidence. She didn't know what was about to happen next, that this simple visit would turn into a life-changing moment. To everyone else in that restaurant, Maria looked like an ordinary woman who didn't belong there. But what they didn't know was that she was the wife of the man who owned the very business empire that many of them admired. She had no need to show off her wealth or status. Her grace spoke louder than any jewelry could. As she stood by the reception desk, waiting to speak to someone, she still believed in the goodness of people. She thought everyone deserved respect no matter how they looked. In her heart, she carried kindness, humility, and a belief that true beauty comes from simplicity. Little did she know in just a few minutes, This quiet moment would turn into a scene that the entire restaurant would never forget. The sun was shining bright when Maria stepped through the glass doors of the grand restaurant. The scent of freshly baked bread and expensive perfume filled the air. Everything inside sparkled: golden lights, crystal glasses, polished floors. The sound of soft piano music echoed gently around her. For a moment, Maria stood still, admiring the beauty of the place. She smiled to herself, thinking how happy Ethan would be to see her here. But that smile didn't last long. As she walked toward the reception desk, she noticed the change in the atmosphere. A few heads turned. Some people stopped eating and glanced at her. Their eyes weren't curious, they were judging. Her plain white dress and simple sandals stood out among the sea of glittering clothes and expensive jewelry. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, looked up. But when her eyes met Maria's, that smile slowly faded. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "Yes," Maria replied gently. "I'm here to meet my husband. He's having a meeting here. His name is Ethan Carter." The receptionist blinked in surprise. "Ethan Carter?" she repeated as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. "Ma'am, are you sure?" Maria nodded with a soft smile. "Yes, he told me he'd be here this afternoon." The receptionist's expression changed slightly. She looked Maria up and down, from her modest clothes to her worn-out purse, and then back at the computer screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said in a tone that had lost all warmth. "This is a private restaurant. We don't allow walk-ins without reservations." Maria frowned slightly but remained calm. "Oh, I understand. But I'm not a walk-in. My husband—" Before she could finish, a waiter came up beside the receptionist and whispered something in her ear. Both of them glanced at Maria again, this time with a mix of suspicion and pity. "I'm sorry," the receptionist interrupted, raising her voice slightly. "But we can't let you wait here. If you don't have a reservation, please wait outside." Maria's heart sank a little. She tried to explain again. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just want to—" But before she could say more, another customer, an older woman dressed in an elegant gown, leaned toward her friend and whispered loudly, "These kinds of people come here hoping for leftovers or attention." A few people chuckled softly. Maria's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She looked down, not wanting to cause a scene. The words felt like small knives cutting her pride. The waiter stepped closer, his tone firm but fake polite. "Ma'am, please leave the restaurant. We don't allow loitering." Maria stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm not loitering," she said quietly. "I'm just waiting for my husband." He sighed impatiently. "Then call him, ma'am. But you can't stand here." Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse to take out her phone. But before she could unlock it, the waiter gently but firmly guided her toward the door. "Please, ma'am. Outside." She wanted to resist, to explain again, but her voice froze. The stares, the whispers, the coldness, it was too much. She nodded silently and walked out. As soon as she stepped outside, the warm air hit her face. She stood on the sidewalk, feeling the sting of humiliation. Cars passed by, people walked in and out of nearby shops, but in that moment, she felt completely invisible. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't want anyone to see her cry. Inside, through the glass doors, she could still see the waiter and receptionist talking and laughing quietly. Maybe they thought they'd done their job. Maybe they thought she really didn't belong there. Maria took a deep breath and sat down on the stone bench near the entrance. She looked up at the sky, whispering softly, "Why do people judge so easily?" She wasn't angry, just deeply hurt. She had never cared about fancy places or expensive food, but being treated like she was less than others broke something inside her. All she wanted was to surprise her husband, to share a simple meal. Instead, she was treated like an intruder. Minutes passed slowly. She looked at her phone, wondering if she should call Ethan. But she didn't want to disturb his meeting. She thought, maybe I'll just wait a few more minutes. He'll be done soon.